Hey folks, welcome back to the Husker Big Red YouTube channel. I'm Chris Peterson and this is Danny Gillette of HuskerBigRed.com, and we're coming at you here on a Monday. There's lots of recruiting news, lots of things going on with Nebraska football, and the baseball team got a big win this weekend, a big sweep. So we'll just kind of get into it. But Danny, how are you doing on this Monday morning?
I'm doing good, a little tired, but I like the warm weather, so like the warm weather out here in Massachusetts. Hate Mondays, so it all works out.
Yeah, and it was an interesting weekend, I guess, for Nebraska. Not a ton of things going on, but there's been a few things happening since we kind of did our last show. One kind of topic I guess that we should touch on. A couple of walk-ons were put on scholarship. This past week, John Bullock, Nate Borkacher, both of those guys, everybody was concerned about the scholarship limit, but Matt Rule, those two guys earned it, and he didn't kind of flinch on making that decision. So what were your thoughts on putting those guys on scholarship, despite Nebraska kind of being up against it with the 85-man limit?
Whether or not you agree with their contributions in terms of did they deserve it, I mean, quite honestly, they were two of the harder working players on the team last year. I remember Borkacher kind of being thrown into the mix at tight end a little bit, especially after Voklik went down due to injury, and he played well. I mean, sure we got on him a little bit because he dropped some passes, but there's no doubt that those two work extremely hard. And while we're up against the scholarship limit, I do believe it sets a good precedent if you reward kids who are working hard within the program and give them an opportunity to get a scholarship. So you know i think I think it was a good move because those are the types of players that even if you don't want that, even if they're not going to be all Americans or whatever, you want to have good character guys on your team, have them in the program and set a good precedent and reward them for their hard work no matter what you feel about their contributions.
I think, yeah, it was a good move too, because he's Coach Rule's trying to build up this walk-on program. They added a few walk-ons this week. We've written about that a little bit at HuskerBigRed.com. They got a former walk-on, Barrett Liebentritt. Hopefully that's pronounced right, but
That's how
um,
I would pronounce it. Yeah.
he walked on at Notre Dame, and is a kind of a tight end, but he's going to play fullback at Nebraska. And this is another move that I think is just really smart by Matt Rule. This is the guy that's not going to be taking up a scholarship, as far as I know. But last year he played, in 12 games for the Fighting Irish. He played on their kickoff team. So it's not like this guy was just sitting there not playing at all. So the fact that he's going to come to Nebraska, he can help on special teams. Tight ends, fullbacks play a lot in those positions now. With their ability to block, and add another guy that can potentially, play fullback, which is Coach Rules added a few of those different guys, via the walk on route, and this is another one. But it also, I think, shows those players too that are coming here as a walkout or walk on, excuse me, if you earn it, if you put in the work and you show that you can produce on the field, you're going to be rewarded with the scholarship. And I think it's the right thing to do. And the other part of it is the players. Matt Rule talked about MJ Sherman was one of the guys who said, John Bullock needs a scholarship or needs to be on scholarship. That was kind of, fighting for him. And I think that those guys know who the best players are.
Mm.
You know what I mean?
Hmm.
Like you can't lie to the players about who. That's like, I remember when people talk about like quarterback controversies, like the players know who should start, most of the
Yep.
time. And so it's like the players are going to see that Matt Rule rewarded those guys for their work. And it's also going to come down to the fact too, hey, if I'm number two on the depth chart, if I work my way up and show that I'm a number one, Coach Rule's going to reward me. So this goes beyond just the whole walk-on scholarship thing. It's a message to the whole team that this is an accountability thing, and if you do your part and you make contributions, you're going to get rewarded with playing time. So I loved that move, that the moves to put those guys on scholarship, and I really like this fullback edition from Notre Dame. So a couple of good moves there by Coach Rule, in my opinion.
And you know what? This lines up well with what Marcus Satterfield said in the spring. He wants a physical offense. He's made it clear that he wants the offense to be physical and that they're going to run the football. Well, you know what? The fullback gives you both the physical component and the running component. So it definitely makes sense that they're addressing the fullback position. I think the fullback is going to be a big part of this offense. And, it's great to see one on scholarship. And, I would love to, get back down to the gritty, dirty area, physical smashing type of fullback football that a lot of the Big Ten still uses. I mean, look at Northwestern. I mean, they use their rushing attack and things like that. So, I mean, all these fullback additions and the interest in the fullback, I don't think it's a haphazard, kind of strategy to appease the fans. There is something to it.
For sure, it's interesting because they're not trying to necessarily devote, the scholarships to it, but it is a position I think that they are going to utilize, and it is good to have, a lead blocker in some of those short yardage situations. So it's a position that's not really valued as much anymore, but I'm happy to see the coaching staff use it. And like I said, I mean, on the recruiting trail, I think you're going to see more of the tight ends, that they're going to be kind of converted into, H-back types, but. This will be an interesting move, and a guy that can help Ed Foley too in terms of the special teams potentially. So, I like it in terms of that part of it as well. And then I guess on the recruiting trail, there's been a lot of talk about Dylan Raiola and Carter Nelson, and Carter Nelson. If you didn't see last week, he's got a couple of official visits set up right now to Georgia and Notre Dame. Georgia, I believe he's going June 2nd, which is the same weekend that Dylan Raiola is supposed to take his visit. I know Dylan Raiola, there's a big weekend coming up, I think this weekend for Georgia for unofficial visits, and there's some talk that he could, make it down there for that. I know his brother, you mentioned it, tweeted the bulldog emoji or whatever. I mean, at this point, I really don't see things changing with Dylan Raiola, but what do you think about the visits schedule, I guess, for Carter Nelson and the fact that Nebraska at this point isn't on the visit list? They still could be. He's been there like 7 times, but still.
It's hard for me to get a gauge on what this all really means because, like you said, he's been there 7 times. I mean, I would, him to, visit Nebraska maybe one more time. But look, I've come to the realization that when it comes to this, elite prospects, and I'll repeat this until I'm blue in the face. I've said it. I've said it last week. I've said it in group chats. I've said, it all the time. The odds of us landing a top prospect right now with nothing to go off of as far as this current regime, you know, is concerned, we shouldn't be expecting to land these top recruits. Do we want to land them? Absolutely. Do we have anything to show that, okay, Carter, this is a good offense for you. We're going to use a tight end. Okay, Dylan, we're going to pass the football. This is going to be a quarterback friendly offense. No, nobody knows what the heck is going on right now in terms of offensive style and how it translates to the field. So to ask these, kids to, come in and try to commit and be a part of the program, it's kind of, shooting fish in a barrel. And I think it's a lot to kind of, yes, they could come in and be program changers, but as for now, I don't blame them at all if they want to go, somewhere more reputable right now. I really don't, because maybe if we get a couple 10-win seasons under our belt, things will change. But, as we've said before, winning cures everything, and, a good product on the field, cures everything. And so as much as I want to get, upset or whatever that Carter, is not visiting, or Dylan's not visiting, or any of these guys aren't visiting, I can't blame them at all. I really can't. We got to, show the results on the field first, I think, before any, big time prospects want to come to the program. And the fact that we've recruited as well as we have without anything, on the field yet says a lot about this coaching staff. The wins will have to come in order for this program to, get those big time recruits.
Yeah, it does make it difficult, and that is going to make what happen more. And the thing with Georgia too, I mean, looking at it with Carter Nelson, is that Georgia's missed on some big tight ends here recently. They had the number one tight end in the 2024 class. Landon Thomas was committed. He just flipped to Florida State. The number one tight end in 2023, Deuce Robinson, who was like a Georgia lean for literally months, he went to USC. Walker Lyons went to USC at the end of the 2023 class. So Georgia's basically missed on their last 3 guys they've targeted a tight end. So I really think that's why they're at this point going to shift to Carter Nelson and really hone in on him, because and not that there's not other guys on the board, I'm not saying that, but they've already missed on some other players. So I feel like they're really going to push for Carter Nelson. And, Sean Callahan reported this a long time ago, but he talked about how he thought that Carter Nelson had, an affinity for Notre Dame. So the fact that they're showing up as an unofficial visit tells me that they're a real contender too. Penn State has kind of been thrown around them. I'm not I'm not really that worried about Penn State as much. Maybe that's overlooking them, but I feel like Nebraska is still in the mix. I know they're planning their big visit weekend for June 23rd. We'll see how that works out. It's kind of putting yourself back on the calendar, but at the same time, you're also maybe trying to let Georgia and some of these other schools get their big visit weekends out of the way early, and maybe you can get some of those kids on campus later. But it'll be interesting to see how that strategy plays out, and if they can get Dylan Raiola or Carter Nelson on campus that weekend, because there has been whispers, or at least rumors of Dylan Raiola taking another visit to Nebraska. We'll see if that actually happens. I guess I would say if it does, if he gets to, and that's June 23rd, if Dylan Raiola gets to June 23rd and he's not committed and he visits Nebraska, then I'll say I'll feel better than I do right now, because at this point in time, I don't see him still being uncommitted on June 23rd. I bet my guess right now, like if I had to go to Vegas and bet, is that he would be committed by then to Georgia.
Well, we kind of always said a June, July type of timeline, we thought, right? So that would make sense and that would line up. I think that visit weekend at the end of June, I think, there was a lot of talk about the April visit weekend and, getting recruits on campus and, or not, no, excuse me, the March visit weekend and getting recruits on campus and, things like that. But I think, we could see some commitments that June weekend, maybe not big ones, but, I think, recruits now are starting to kind of really see, what this program is trying to, create and be all about. So, I mean, that's another big visit weekend, and I think this class as a whole, I think it has some really, really good kids, but I'd like to see a couple more commitments. I know we just lost out on Teddy Rezac, who went to Notre Dame. He was a heavy Notre Dame lean anyway, but it's just a guy that I would have liked to land, and I'd love to see another commitment here, and a high caliber one at that.
Yeah, the Teddy Rezac is pretty interesting, I think, because it's strange for Notre Dame to, offer somebody that's, ranked as low as he is, so obviously they saw something, and it's weird. I just feel like Nebraska messed up that recruitment, in my honest opinion. I know that people might not want to say that, or they might say, I've read some people say, well, Nebraska just offered him just like an obligatory offer. Like, I don't, if you didn't care about getting him, why would you offer him before he could? That just made you look stupid. I mean, that made you look like, oh, you wanted to try to get in, but it was too late. So I don't really buy that. I think Nebraska offered him for a reason, but they offered him way too late. He was on campus, and so I don't know. It's disappointing that Notre Dame would see something in that kid. Now, if he goes and becomes a good player at Notre Dame, you're really going to be kicking yourself, because if Nebraska had recruited him, like hard at all, I think he would have been committed here already. So, it is what it is. But I definitely think, if they didn't evaluate him as a scholarship player or whatever, I don't understand offering him after Notre Dame did. So to me, I thought that was, kind of like almost like a panic type move. Maybe I'm not really sure. What did you think about it?
I thought it was a little strange because you wrote, or I think one of us wrote something. It's early in the morning here, but we wrote, Nebraska offered him, and then literally 2 hours later, he committed to Notre Dame. So, I mean, I thought it was kind of interesting just because it's almost like, um, they kind of, in my opinion, it looks like they dropped the ball only because, you know, they offered him literally at the last second, and this was a guy who was building interest throughout his recruitment. Notre Dame looked to really be in on him, but still a last second offer kind of says to me that maybe they didn't want him, or maybe they just didn't follow up or follow through. So he would have been really good in the 3-3-5 type of defense, an aggressive player, a good rusher. So I mean, it's gonna be interesting to see what he does at Notre Dame, and I wish he could have came here, quite honestly.
Yeah, it's interesting because it's not like Nebraska wasn't recruiting him. I mean, he was on campus earlier this spring, and so it's weird to, I mean, with how much they want to recruit in-state guys. I mean, this is obviously a guy that's, legitimate, at least for Notre Dame's interest. I mean, they have one of the best recruiting classes in the country. So the fact that they, are taking him, tells you something, because they have a lot of, probably better options than Nebraska does right now. I mean, just looking at the way, I mean, Notre Dame's put together like 4 or 5 top 10 recruiting classes in a row. So that is interesting. And I do agree with you. I think that Nebraska dropped the ball on that one. I think if they could go back in time, they probably would offer him, when he visited the spring, but it is what it is. You have to just move on and take it what it's for. But I do think that they have made some positive inroads, obviously, with Isaiah McMorris and Davon Hall. They're both visiting on that June 23rd weekend that we talked about. So I think that is a really positive thing. I believe for a fact when Matt Rule talked about Garrett McGuire and the narrative on the recruiting trail, I think he had those 2 recruitments in mind. So the fact that they started kind of trending in another direction, I think that trend has stopped. As far as like USC and Penn State for Davon Hall, I think Nebraska's right near the top of that list now. Garrett McGuire's really turned things around, and I feel like Nebraska at least has a puncher's chance to win those recruitments right now.
I want Hall so badly. He's been on my, recruitment list since last year, and he would just be perfect for this offense. Another in-state kid, and I'm excited to see what McGuire does on the field and how that translates to the wide receiver unit. Because I listened to him talk during his press conference, and he's really, really knowledgeable. Don't let his age fool you. I think, and I've said this before as well, but it's worth repeating. I think he's going to be one of the coaches that we're going to need to replace in a couple of years because he'll be off doing something a lot bigger at another school. And my thing is, I would rather a coach get promoted and go off and do bigger things at another school than get fired, because we've seen a lot of that lately, and it hasn't been pretty. But no, I am very encouraged by the inroads Nebraska has made, and I'll be interested to see what happens on that weekend. I mean, it would be nice if a guy like McMorris committed that weekend, but we'll see, we'll see. And I like where the class stands overall, but I'd love to see a couple more additions. Then again, I understand it's kind of hard to do so when you don't know what the product on the field is going to be like yet or how it's going to look. So I think it's going to set up for an interesting fall in terms of recruiting as well.
And it's interesting with those 2 guys because their quarterback is Daniel Kalen, who is probably somebody else that, maybe looking back, it's hard to say, oh, you shouldn't have recruited Dylan Raiola. But at the same time, if you had pushed for Daniel Kalen, I truly believe he'd be a Nebraska commit right now. If you'd pushed for Teddy Rezac, he'd be a Nebraska commit right now. And then if you had Daniel Kalen, I bet you'd be in a better position for Davon Hall and Isaiah McMorris. So, if you want to value in-state recruits, you would kind of have to do that. And if you're an in-state player at Nebraska, I mean, if you're Daniel Kalen, you don't feel like you were valued. Teddy Rezac doesn't feel like he's valued, and these guys all communicate with each other. It's not like they don't know each other. So I mean, I just think I'm not saying that it's something to be concerned about or whatever, but it would be nice to get a big commitment, from an in-state kid, McMorris or Hall, and hopefully, Matt Rule and company can make it happen, because there have been some missteps, I think, in this 2024 class with in-state recruiting in general.
Yeah, and I think more in-state kids will come. I mean, I'm predicting more commitments in season, but I do think that although they're not landing in-state kids, they are making inroads in other areas. Miami Palmetto athlete Ja'Cory Barney is set to visit on June 2nd, and he got a crystal ball prediction from Will Turboff of Husker 24/7 last week. It's the same school that Willis McGahee the fourth committed is from, who also committed to Nebraska. So I mean, it's going to be interesting to see if they can land Barney and establish a Florida pipeline that can stick. That's my thing. Establishing a Florida pipeline. I mean, we kind of did that under Frost, but it didn't stick. So now we need those Florida guys to stick.
Yeah, and that would be another good commitment. There's some, obviously, a few guys out in California. Breland just put Nebraska in his top 10. Brandon
Avery
Baker
Breland, yeah.
has been talking about taking visits. I don't know, Nathaniel Frazier. I haven't heard a lot of talk about him lately. So I mean, we'll see if he comes at all in the next month. I get my thing with like Baker and Frazier and Breland. You have to get like those guys have to be on that June 23rd visit. Or I just don't think you have a shot, to be honest. I mean, if that's your big visit weekend for official visits, then Baker, Frazier, and Breland have got to be there that weekend, or what's the point of even recruiting him? That's my opinion.
Well, Frazier wants to come in season, so I could see him not coming for this visit weekend, but coming on another time, in season. So, I mean, I would like to have them there. Don't get me wrong, but I think he will come back to campus at some point, meaning Frazier.
And that would be good. I mean, but I mean, because a lot of times, that when you're going across country, 3 times is a big number for that visit. So I mean, I could see it, but I just don't. I think you need to have him on campus at some point this summer. I don't think you can go from March until September and not get the kid on campus with a top 10 running back and all the other teams interested and still have a shot. So that's my opinion. I don't think that Nebraska's going to have an opportunity with those guys unless they get them on campus this summer at some point.
And on that June 23rd visit weekend, we also have Adam Kasai, who's the edge rusher from Palm Bay, Florida, American Heritage, which is a very good school down in Florida. 6'7", 230 pounds. He's kind of trending to Rutgers right now. And then we also have Ernest Campbell, who's going to be on an official visit that weekend. He's a wide receiver from Texas, and he's predicted by On3 to go to TCU. However, TCU has a 31% prediction rate, while Nebraska has a 27% prediction rate. So that's interesting. That appears to be a close race, and so there are other guys there as well that are worth looking out for and looking at. And so I'll be interested to see how that weekend shapes up overall, because I do think there's um there's a good chance that we could have some commitments, by the end of June.
Yeah, I think there'll definitely be some more commitments by the end of June, and there's still obviously July. You have chances for unofficial visits and stuff like that too. So I mean, even if it's there's just different windows for things, but it's important to try to get some of these guys, especially these California or these out of state guys, on campus as many times as possible before they commit. But I do think that with this class, I mean, I think that you're going to see not a similar, kind of flurry to last year, but I think you're going to see more activity towards signing day than you're going to see like this. Like, I really just I don't see Nebraska getting a ton of commitments like in June, July, and August. I think they will, but it's like you have to look at the type of guys that are going to make those commitments, right? I mean, that's the the 3-star evaluations. It's not going to be the Dylan Raiola types. I mean, you can get some of those guys for sure, but I do think that the more of those early commitments are going to be, some of those 3-star guys, which can be really good players. I'm not saying anything, but I just think it's more Nebraska's kind of identifying and taking a chance on some on more of those guys than you're going to see, Nathaniel Frazier and Brandon Baker and these guys commit to Nebraska in June. That being said, if you can get them on campus, keep them engaged, get them back this fall, and you look at it in the fall, then you got a chance. I mean, Brandon Baker, I don't think is deciding until signing day. So, I mean, a lot of these guys, you have a long time you just have to keep yourself in it, especially with Nebraska, like you said, until they can show on the field, like, hey, this is what we got going on. And then I think more towards the end of the signing period, kind of like this year, you're going to see Nebraska get in with some more guys. That's just how I kind of think it's going to play out.
Well, I was talking to some people about recruiting in general, some recruiting expert type of people, and they say, it's always important to get the last visit. So if Nebraska can get the last visit and, kind of help seal the deal, I mean, I think that would be very crucial come, signing day and, the early signing period. And, for what it's worth, I think, the first week in June, June 2nd, they're going to get Peyton Morgan, Ja'Cory Barney, Caleb Pyfrom, and Kamari McClellan on campus. And, Pyfrom is trending towards Nebraska, and so is Barney. So Pyfrom is a guy that, I'd be watching out for as well. I think he's a very good player. He would be another in-state kid. So, I mean, any offensive line help we can get is a good one. And I think Pyfrom has a chance to be pretty good, once he starts his collegiate career.
Yeah, and he's somebody I would watch out for as like a commitment in June. With
Yeah.
it seems like Matt Rule. There was talk about in-state recruiting not being so great, and then boom, they went out and got Ashton Murphy. So I mean, I feel like they'll get a commitment here, and that will kind of ease that the chatter or whatever. Which I mean, it is what it is, and yeah, some of it's probably made up by people like us or whatever. But perception's reality too in recruiting. So I mean that you can't just ignore that. So I didn't want to switch gears, before we round up here to basketball. I think there's a couple of interesting things to talk about here. First, I know Nebraska was hosting Amelie Yaloho. I'm sorry, I probably totally butchered that name, but he's 2023 6'8" power forward. Can play the 3-2 from Finland, and visited Texas Tech yesterday. So I mean, he's in the mix with a few different teams. But I think it would be a great move for Nebraska if they could get him. They need somebody who can kind of play those minutes. He could take over kind of the Breidenbach, role after he transferred out. And I think he would be a nice developmental piece going forward. He's not ranked according to the 24/7 composite rankings. He's ranked as a low 3-star, and on 3, but it's I don't know that truly reflects, his ability, but I think it would be a nice piece to develop long term for Fred going forward.
And now that you've done so well in the transfer portal, if you're Fred, you can, afford to, develop long pieces and kind of let some things play out. And, I think that would be a great pickup for Nebraska basketball. I mean, what do you say, 6'8"? I mean,
Yep.
that's wasn't that the exact same height as Derek Walker, I think?
Yeah, he might be 6'9",
But I
but
mean,
yeah.
we saw how valuable the power forward was to the offense last season. It wasn't just, the, flashy point guards like it had been in previous seasons under Fred Hoiberg. So, I mean, if we can land a developmental piece, for the power forward position, one that is essential to Big Ten basketball, then I'd feel pretty comfortable, you know, grabbing him and landing him and allowing him to develop. That's the thing with, building a good program is getting good solid players that can play right away while also getting solid players that you can develop. So that way you can just keep the train moving, so to speak, in terms of production and trying to get, the most out of the players that you can. And quite honestly, development isn't an area where Fred has, passed with flying colors, so to speak. But, I think he showed a little bit last year with Lawrence and, Sam Hoiberg even. So we'll see what happens there. But overall, I've been pretty happy with this offseason for Nebraska basketball.
Yeah, this would be a good take. They've got 2 scholarships left, and I would like to see him add 1 transfer and then, a 2023 kid who's got, some long-term ability to be a future starter maybe because I feel like he could play the 3-4 role kind of like Juwan Gary does. He shoots the 3 pretty well. He can rebound. He's a decent defender. So there's a lot to like there, but Texas Tech and some other big programs are in the mix. So we'll see, how that kind of winds up. And then another thing I wanted to touch on is Keisei Tominaga. He didn't get invited to the NBA draft combine. He didn't get invited to the G League camp, which is kind of the way you can play your way into the combine. So I really don't see him at this point not coming back to Nebraska. I mean, there's no chance he's getting drafted. I mean, if he really wanted to go to the G League, he maybe would get signed, for the G League or whatever. But to me, it just seems clear that, his best path forward is at Nebraska. I do think that, he can move himself into being, a top one. But yeah, right now, I don't even think he's a top 100 prospect in 2024. Or in this 2023 draft. So I would be stunned, I guess, at this point if Keisei did not come back to Nebraska.
Me too. And if he had a full season last year in terms of, playing and, starting, I think it might be a different story. But you add, Tominaga to this roster with the transfers we've already had, it's shaping up to be on paper a really good season for Nebraska basketball. And if Fred doesn't do anything this year, and I feel like we say this every time we talk about Nebraska basketball, but if Fred, you know, doesn't make any sort of postseason anything this year, then he's got to go.
Yeah, that's true. I think they will. I think this team is going to win, somewhere between 16 and 20 games, 16, 17 games. So I think they'll be, right there with a winning record. I don't know if it'll be good enough to get into the NCAA tournament, but I do like how this roster has come together. I'd like to see maybe another combo guard, just another kind of a wing player. But other than that, I mean, the roster's, pretty much set. And, CJ Wilcher, I know a lot of people were looking at him leaving, but he's still going to be here. Jamarcus Lawrence, Hoiberg, they only have the one true point guard, in Ulis. So we'll see how that works out. But it wouldn't surprise me if they added another combo guard at some point. Just I think Jamarcus Lawrence could be that guy too, to be the backup point guard. But you know, I like his two guard role, but we'll see what happens. And I think Hoiberg could maybe play there a little bit too, but you don't want to be in a situation where like Ulis gets hurt and then you're like, oh God, who's going to play point guard now? So I mean, I would like in some way, but it's not easy. I mean, it's not easy because you do have other spots that you need to fill. But I feel like this team just the starting lineup just kind of fits better. You've got Ulis at point guard, Casey at the two, and then depending how the health works out with everybody else. I mean, you could have Juwan Gary at the three, you could have Bryce Williams at the three. You could have Bryce at the three, Gary at the four, and Rink Mast at the five, and then Alik and Jamarcus Lawrence coming off the bench with
That's
Hoiberg
solid.
and Wilcher. I mean, yeah. So you've
Yeah.
got a solid rotation. And then if a team wants to play big, you can play Mast and then Alik at power forward, Gary, and you could play Bryce Williams at the two, honestly, too. So I mean, you could have a 6'7" guy at the two, and then bunch of. So I just feel like there's a lot of different maneuvers Nebraska can make on a nightly basis.
Yeah, I mean, and you touched on something right there. As long as everybody stays healthy. I mean, I don't think there
Yeah,
were too many times last season when Nebraska's original starting five played together.
yeah.
So health is going to be crucial for next year. And I do like all the combinations and the depth that these transfers offer. And I'll be curious to see what type of lineups they roll out.
That's why I liked Bryce Williams too, because I feel like he gives you depth at 2 through 4. I mean, I'm not saying you want him to play 4 a ton, but I just feel like it takes a lot of pressure, especially early in the season, off Juwan Gary. If he
Yeah.
because it's like, yeah, he's injured, but that just because he can come back and play doesn't mean that he's going to be ready to play like 30
Right.
minutes a night. You know what I mean?
Yep.
So I feel good about that, and because that's how you get hurt. You know what I mean? You try to come back and play 33 minutes a night, and then all of a sudden, 10 games in, you're done for the season.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's what we don't want to see happen. But yeah, I feel like there's depth on this roster, and if they could add, another player or two, you're looking at a lot of, pretty solid players. I mean, the Bark Tovik projections have Nebraska pretty high right now, and I think it is postseason or bust for Fred Hoiberg, one way or the other.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting to see how they start the season because there were points last season where you know beating Creighton was obviously a huge victory, and starting beating there was one other team they beat that they probably shouldn't have even been close. And but anyway, that early season start is going to be crucial, and then conference play is going to be important as well. And unfortunately, last year conference play is when all the injuries started to happen. During that time frame, but they managed to pull themselves together nicely and make it exciting to watch basketball again. So I'm interested to see how this team fares next year. And I do think it's postseason or bust, and we'll see if Fred and Fred and the team are up for the challenge.
So before we transition to subscriber, I did want to mention the baseball team because we were talking about, Will Bolt doesn't make the Big Ten tournament. He should be fired. Well, Nebraska clinched their spot in the Big Ten tournament yesterday. They got a sweep this weekend over Penn State, and Illinois lost yesterday. So Illinois can't finish at 12 or is going to finish up at 12-12. Nebraska can't finish worse than 13-11. So they are going to make the Big Ten tournament. And actually, right now, they're sitting in a tie for fourth place, a couple games out of actually first. I mean, there's only 3 games left, so I don't think they're going to move up that high, but there's still a chance they could get into that top 3-4. So, do you think that's enough for Will Bolt to keep his job at least for one more year?
Maybe one more year, but I mean the results haven't been, throw a parade in Lincoln. You know what I mean? Like maybe one more year, but I mean I think Will Bolt is also on borrowed time. It's kind of interesting how all these coaches, all these coaches and their time frames are from Frost to will Hoiberg get fired, will Bolt get fired. I mean, again, I do not envy the job that Trev has to do to clean up Bill Moose's mess, but
But then again, if I mean the tournament's in Omaha, so I mean if Nebraska can just get in there and they got 3 more regular season games this weekend, um, you know Michigan won the thing last year. There's not a dominant team this year, so I
yeah,
mean it really is. So who's to say that in 3 weeks we're not sitting here talking about Nebraska in the NCAA tournament because they won the Big
true.
Ten. That's the only way they're making it. They're not getting it in a large berth. Honestly, I haven't followed it this closely, because Nebraska hasn't been that great, Michigan either. But I don't think that the Big Ten's probably getting in a large bid into this tournament because it's
No.
just, I mean, maybe sometimes they get two or three, but it's not a strong baseball conference being in the North. And this year it's really not good. I mean, Indiana's okay, but Nebraska could do it. I mean, I think they if the pitching can hold up because they've got the offense. So we'll see what happens. But anyway, just wanted to bring that up and make sure that you guys, make sure to subscribe. Check out huskerbigred.com. We'll have a ton of content, on recruiting, basketball, and everything, for the Nebraska Cornhuskers. And we should be back with another episode potentially this week. We'll let you know about that. And as always, everybody, go Big Red.
Go Big Red.